Support for Consider This is provided by Sequent Planning, an SEC-registered investment advisor, helping people make informed retirement income decisions. Additional information is available at sequentomaha.com.
From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
The all too familiar sights and sounds of Lauritsen Gardens. But wait, there's more. Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, plant conservation. That's right. Joining us to talk more about it is Jim Locklear. Jim is the Director of Conservation for Lauritsen Gardens. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, thanks.
All right, let's start with when we talk plants, what are we talking, Jim?
Well, all of the familiar things you think of: trees, shrubs, grasses, wildflowers, the whole gamut of the green world.
Okay, and we have a photo up for our viewers. Tell us what we're seeing there.
Well, this is a view within the garden, and it combines quite a bit different combinations of plants. You see the trees on the outside. If you're off in the distance, we have our rose garden near us. We have the herb garden, but we also have prairie plantings there. And then if you come back in the spring, you saw that same image, it would be full of daffodils. We've planted daffodils into the prairie that will bloom in the spring, and then they're covered up by the grasses in the summer. So a lot of diversity.
Beautiful. How many plant species are we talking in North America?
Nobody knows exactly for sure. Somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 plants in North America.
Okay, and what percentage of those, Jim, run the risk of becoming extinct?
Scientists think about a third are what they call at risk. So some are critically endangered. You know, there's just like one or two populations left. Others are under threats of various kinds, maybe development or chemical usage, things like that. So, but that's, they say about a third, 1,500.
Okay, and what are we seeing here, Jim?
Well, this is an example of one of Nebraska's endangered plants. This is the blowout penstemon that occurs in the Nebraska sandhills. And it is a plant that once was more common in the sandhills, but has become rare in the last few decades because its habitat is disappearing.
Okay, and we've got another one here.
Yeah, and now this is a different kind of a plant. This is one from the Kansas City area that we're working with. It's a shrub called Ozark leatherwood, and it is a plant that for some reason has always been rare. We don't know why, but there's just very few populations, and so those occurrences are very vulnerable. If a disease or something could get in there, it could eliminate the plant very quickly. So we haven't seen it decline, but it just is always rare for reasons we don't quite understand yet.
How does the Center for Plant Conservation fit into all of this?
Well, that is a national enterprise to conserve the endangered plants of the United States. And so it's a network of about 50 botanic gardens, including Lauritsen Gardens, that work all over the country to help support plant conservation in their regions. So you have the Missouri Botanic Garden working in the Ozarks, you have the Denver Botanic Garden working in the Rocky Mountains, and then we have that big patch of open country, the Great Plains. And so that's the area that we're focusing on. And we're trying to support conservation primarily in grassland areas.
Tell us a little bit about the program, because when we think about Lauritsen Gardens, we don't typically think about something like this. It's something you've been doing for a while now.
Yeah.
So as people ask you broad strokes, what is it all about?
Well, it's in some ways, people are familiar with Henry Dorley Zoo and the great work they do in conserving endangered animals. People are familiar with pandas and rhinos and whooping cranes, and But that's a bit of a behind the scenes. A lot of folks come to the zoo just to see the animals and never know about the world-class conservation efforts. Kind of the same thing with Lauritsen Gardens. People come to the gardens to enjoy a beautiful experience and just to soak up the wonder of the place. But we also are working behind the scenes to conserve plants that are in danger of going extinct. And that includes some on-site work, but also off-site work across Nebraska and in other parts of the Great Plains.
So how did you become involved in this, Jim?
Well, I've always loved plants for reasons I can't explain. And I've worked with them as a botanist and doing scientific research. I've also done gardening and horticulture, and this just allows me to combine both things. So just love it.
Okay, now at the heart of a discussion like this is something called biodiversity.
Right.
How do you define that?
Well, biodiversity is the natural diversity of plants and animals that occur in a given habitat or given community. So a prairie has its own unique biodiversity, a woodland has its own unique biodiversity, and it's everything from plants to insects to, in a prairie all the way up to historically bison and wolves. And so to preserve biodiversity is to try and save as many of those pieces as possible, because although we've done a lot of research over the years, we don't fully understand how all these pieces fit together and who's dependent or what's dependent on whom. And so really wise conservation is, as somebody once put it, just to save all the pieces.
Yeah, and so we have some photos here. Jim, what are we looking at as you're talking about biodiversity?
Well, strangely enough, this is our parking lot. So as you come into the garden, and that's the entrance into the visitor center, and as we've been looking over the garden and doing our various like bee, butterfly, and bird surveys, we found actually some of the highest levels of biodiversity, just the variety of things in our parking lot. Part of it, and it kind of makes sense when you think about it, there's lots of native trees and shrubs planted there. There's water, there's rock work, there's lots of edges, and that is that's a much more biodiverse habitat than like a bluegrass lawn or a cornfield. So one of the things that we know about biodiversity, both in a urban setting like this or in the wild, is just the more variety of plants you have, the more variety of animals you'll have, and an overall healthier environment.
Wow, okay, and we have another photo here, and you mentioned, what are we seeing?
Well, that is a warbler, and one of the things that we've been trying to do at the garden is just to understand what we have in terms of the wildlife we attract and what the garden supports. And so we've been doing bird surveys as well as some other kinds of wildlife, and we're very surprised to find, well, our bird numbers now I think are 153 different species, and about 20 of those are warblers, which are these small little birds that migrate through in the spring. So we're excited to know that we actually support these birds that come from the tropics all the way up to Canada and back in the spring. So this next shot is of a butterfly, and butterflies are very important to plant life as well as our life, because they pollinate flowers that produce seed or fruit that we consume and that other creatures consume. And we found 57 different types of butterflies in the garden, so that's been fun. This is one of our butterfly volunteers, Joanne, and she and a couple other folks on her crew come out once a week, during the growing season, and they just look for butterflies.
I'll be darned. And here?
Another thing we've been doing, this started this year, is we're surveying moths. Now, butterflies are out during the day, moths are out at night. They come to your lights at night, so you have to do this when it gets dark. And so we had a couple of nights where we set up lights and these sheets, and moths come to them, and then we have some moth experts that take photos of them and identify them, and 105 different moths were found this summer in the garden, which surprised us all. So it's exciting to learn what we have and then where it occurs too within the garden.
Wow.
We're doing bee surveys. Everybody's familiar with honeybees and bumblebees, and a lot of folks are familiar with the fact that honeybees are declining, but there are lots and lots of native bees. In fact, Nebraska probably has a couple of thousand different species of native bees. And so we're trying to understand the bees we have at the garden. So we have a university group that's coming up 3 times, they've come up 3 years now throughout the growing season, and they collect bees, identify them for us, and so far they've identified 50 different, but that's just really in the first year or so. So we're finding just surprising levels of biological diversity at the gardens.
Wow. Okay, now there's also something called conservation seed banking,
Right,
and we
right.
have some photos
Sure,
to kind of support what you're going to be talking
Okay.
about there.
Well, that is more off-site work. This is very off-site. This is the Nebraska Sandhills. And this is working with the blowout penstemon. And seed banking is used in situations where a plant is very rare and in danger of going extinct in the wild. And it's an idea of you go in and you collect a sample of seed off of wild populations as a backup against extinction. So here we're out in, trying to think the county, anywhere north of Oshkosh, Nebraska, collecting seed, Garden County, collecting seed off of blowout penstemon. We take that back to the greenhouse, back to our lab, and process that, and then it's stored in long-term storage at a USDA facility. This is collecting seed in the Les Hills over in Iowa for seed banking, but also we want to grow plants from local seed source that we use in our gardens so that they're tuned into our climatic conditions and local environment. So, and there I am buried in some very tall, chigger-filled prairie grasses, and we're collecting seed.
Wow.
Here back at the lab, we have to clean it, process it, and then in the case of the seed banking, we count it, and then we ship it off to this National Genetic Resource Preservation Lab in Fort Collins, Colorado.
And here, just you doing your work. What is your, gosh, a lot of ways I could ask this. What's the most interesting part about what you do?
Well, it's all interesting. I love the on-site aspects of really just understanding the place better. You know, we're 100 acres, and we're a botanical garden. We're created to be a place of beauty. But to understand what, you know, the sort of the ecological riches that are there, and then to try and improve how we manage the place for that. So at Lauritsen, we're talking about ecological horticulture, where we want to practice just the best possible showboat horticulture that we can, but do it in a way that uses less pesticides, less fertilizer, less water, all those kinds of things. So that's very satisfying when the things we've learned about the place we can integrate into how we care for the place. But I also just love traveling across the Great Plains, like the Sandhills and other places, and seeing these beautiful wildflowers in remote habitat that probably few have the privilege of seeing. So really both ends of the spectrum. It's a wonderful job.
Jim, when we go back in time and we think about how we arrived at where we are, was there a point in your life where you thought, this is what I'm going to do? And if there was, where were you? Did you have somebody who was of great influence for you, or how did you become interested in all this?
You know, as I said, I've always loved plants. Don't really know why. Just enjoyed, first of all, just learning names as a kid, and you know, had the leaf collection and all those kinds of things. Went to college, studied botany, and enjoyed that, but couldn't find a job in botany, so I got a job in a greenhouse and started learning how to grow plants. And I just found that enormously satisfying, especially when we started to grow wildflowers, where we would go out and collect seed of these plants and then bring them back and try and figure out how to grow them. So there's a matter of being in the environment at the right time to collect seed, because sometimes it may just be a week that it's ripe and available before it disappears.
Yeah.
And then bringing that back and then trying to figure out there's oftentimes lots of different tricks you have to do to get the seed to germinate. And then to grow those plants, I just found it captivating. So.
Wow, most memorable place you've ever been because of what you do?
Well, I'd have to say some of the parts of the Sandhills. It's just, you know, it's beautiful, it's remote, it's some of the most pristine grassland left on earth. It's well cared for by the ranchers that are on the land, and then just to see it's in its natural environment. This is another kind of grassland. This is called sand sage prairie, which is similar, but it has this shrub component, and we're doing a lot of work trying to help people understand the ecology of this and identify rare plants that are associated with it. It's a little different from the Sandhills. It occurs all the way from Nebraska down into New Mexico. So we kind of feel like we've adopted this plant community, and we're trying to help the world understand its conservation values and protect it a little bit better. This is some in Oklahoma, and so it's fairly widespread but scattered. and kind of overlooked, and we're finding that speaking of biodiversity, there are lots of plants, rare plants associated with it that weren't understood before, and a lot of grassland birds as well. And so we're trying to, we do research, we publish papers, and we give talks to try and encourage conservation of this plant community.
Yeah, when you talk about the biological piece, what are you doing in your own backyard? You know, just in terms of, we've been to different places now in the program, but what are we doing close to home?
Well, in some ways, kind of like our parking lot, I'm trying to create more diversity and variety. It's taking out more lawn, although I have to struggle with my wife a little bit about that, but planting more beds of shrubs and things that have fruit and provide different layers of habitat. And so, you know, we're seeing some different birds that we hadn't had before, and so there's small things you can do like that, that just even on a local scale can improve biodiversity.
Wow. Okay, this Conservation Discovery Garden, we have some photos of that, and I'd really like to walk our viewers through. Just beautiful stuff. So we'll put the first one up, and we'll just take them through. All right.
This is one of our newest gardens. It opened in 2015, and it's one of our most intentionally educational gardens. So the idea is, as you walk through this garden, you encounter different conservation practices. In this case, water, this is called bioretention, where we try and retain water on site, let it soak into the ground, and be cleansed by going through a series of ponds. So we talk about water conservation, the use of native plants in the landscape to reduce the amount of water we have to use to maintain our landscapes. We also show little vignettes of plant communities that you would see across Nebraska, just to kind of help people appreciate it. This is an area where we're restoring oak woodland. We have within our 100 acres about 10 acres of natural oak woodland, like Fontenelle Forest, only on a smaller scale. And so we're collecting seed off of our oak trees on site, growing those trees out and planting them back into the landscape. So we've planted about 300 bur oak back into the 100 acres. And bur oak are very important trees they're really the keystone trees of our woodlands. So we're trying to recreate that in some places. And then we just have, this is an area where we've planted a lot of prairie grasses and wildflowers, and so it gives just a small sense of the natural landscape. You know, we have very highly maintained things like tulip beds and rose gardens that are very high horticulture practice, but we also want people to appreciate natural beauty as well. So we have more of that in this garden. This is actually a cistern, a water system, kind of like a giant rain barrel. We collect water off the roof of our building and store it there, and then we use it to supplement irrigation. It's old ancient technology, but it's kind of hip now, so we're talking a little bit about that. So demonstrating some practices people could use in their own home landscapes.
Wow, we have talked and been to a few different places during this program. I'm curious though, with everything this involves, tell us a little bit about the staff. Surely you're not doing this all on your own. So who is it, you know, with whom you're working, and what kind of backgrounds and experiences do those people bring to the table, Jim?
Well, we have about 70 staff at Lauritsen, and a little over 20 of them are in the horticulture side of things, the gardening side. The conservation program is just myself, but I work very closely with our horticulture staff, and we have some folks there that are very good in like bird identification and other wildlife identification. So they're watching for me, and then I'm watching and informing them, and then we're trying to devise practices that just manage the landscape a little bit better. So as an example, this year for the first time we're actually burning some of our prairie areas within the garden, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. We're, you know, in a very urbanized setting, and we're by the interstate, and you know, we're just minutes from the old market, and we're doing prairie fire burning, prescribed burning, which is a natural way of rejuvenating and renovating some of our warm season areas. And so we're trying to take a little ecology and apply it to our horticulture practice. And so that involves the whole team, the horticulture team and me as well. And I've had a conservation intern this summer, and so we share staff as well.
Okay, yeah, and I was thinking as you were talking about timeframes, a day in your life, probably never a dull moment. You obviously get to collaborate with others, but when we talk seasons, and we often do that in the plant world, where do we find you, you know, when the snow falls and it's covered the ground, for example, and then we transition into spring? What does your year really look like from a conservation standpoint?
Well, this time of year, the field work is over, and so I do a lot of writing, both scientific articles for submission to publications, give presentations. I gave one at UNL a couple of weeks ago, and another out in Gering, Nebraska, a couple of weeks before that, and so a lot of trying to communicate what we're doing in the conservation program. So this is a good time of year, and then early winter also is a good time of year for that kind of work. Cleaning seed and getting it ready to ship off for long-term storage. Then as spring comes along, we'll be sowing a lot of seed in the greenhouse and growing some of these plants out for planting later in the summer. Then in spring and summer, and really in the fall, there's a lot of field time. So whether it's out in the garden doing bird surveys or butterfly surveys, or off-site in different parts of the Nebraska or the Great Plains collecting seed, or doing some of our research projects. So there's a lot of variety, which is really wonderful.
When you are out in the community presenting, what is the most commonly asked question of you? What do people seem to want to know the most about?
Well, I think people are surprised that we're trying to do conservation at the garden. It just doesn't seem to fit. If they've been there, they realize it's a beautiful place. It's a showcase. It's a great place for a wedding or a retreat or just personal enjoyment. But they're surprised to realize we're doing good science there, and that we're making a difference in the conservation of plant communities and plants and the natural environment of Nebraska and the Great Plains. So
well, and not to mention the partnerships that you would be forming. I mean, again, you've been mentioning different places throughout the program. These are people that maybe Lauritsen Gardens would never have met, experiences never been had. Talk a little bit more about those partnerships and how important that really is from an awareness standpoint beyond, right?
Well, I appreciate that. We do have we're growing connections with the university community, UNO and UNL as well. We have there's a biologist, Dr. Ted Burke at Creighton University, who verifies a lot of our findings at the garden, particularly butterflies. We are involved with organizations like the Nature Conservancy, that is a national conservation organization. We've done some seed collecting on their properties, restoration on their lands. The Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, we've worked a lot with them in terms of conservation efforts. On a bigger scale, we did a project at a National Park Service unit in New Mexico this past year, and a U.S. Forest Service property in Colorado. So we're working with state and federal private conservation organizations. And we don't own prairies or places like that, but we try and support the work of organizations and agencies that do, and in managing them.
How can viewers support what you're doing, Jim?
Well, certainly memberships at the garden support us across the board, and we are a membership-based organization, and so that is huge. Visiting the garden, buying things in the gift shop, all those things that support the overall enterprise, support the conservation program as well.
Okay, and if we could all take a step toward plant conservation, what would be the easiest thing that we could be doing to make a difference?
Well, almost everybody that has a property has a garden, a flower garden of some kind, or a border, and planting a greater variety of things into that habitat. Milkweeds are really important for migrating monarch butterflies, and so, and for bees as well. So adding more plants that are native to our environment here, whether it's prairie or woodland, would be something that would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. And 2020, big year. That's your 10-year anniversary for plant conservation. So now that you have this almost decade behind you, what do you see in this particular realm moving forward, Jim? Not just for Lauritsen Gardens, but big picture.
Sure. Well, we want to be involved in more seed banking projects. We've got about 6 plants that we've worked with. Next year, we're hoping to bring in another 4 to 6. Which may not sound like a lot, but there's a lot of work involved in getting out and collecting seed and getting it back, and so and expanding our reach from Nebraska across the Great Plains. We our Sensage Prairie research, we're actively working to move from talking to the scientific community to the range management community, the folks that are on the ground and managing these lands, to help them realize what a wonderful, rich, biodiverse resource it is, and to try and adapt management practices that support that. So we're trying to take the show on the road a little bit more too, and just do more in terms of making our place a little bit more ecologically friendly. Things that maybe the visitor would never know, but we know.
Okay, 30 seconds.
Sure.
Final thoughts. What's important for us to remember?
Okay. Well, you know, I think the big picture, Lauritsen Gardens is just an incredible asset for the community. I mean, it's a wonderful place, a place of beauty and culture and enrichment. And so please come and enjoy it and discover it. It never ceases to surprise us how many people have not been there and aren't aware of it. So discover it, enjoy it, take our classes, learn more, bring your children and take, we have all kinds of programs for kids. We're doing a lot with schools in Omaha. And then in terms of the conservation program, come to the Conservation Discovery Garden, wander through, get some ideas, take them home, and try and implement them yourself.
Gosh, lots for us to think about and act on, actually.
Right.
Thank you so much for being here
Oh, my
and sharing
pleasure.
your time, your expertise, and all your stories. Best wishes to Lauritsen
Thank you
Gardens
very
moving
much.
forward. Thanks to our students who are working so hard behind the scenes, and of course our viewers for watching. As we close, a look at UNO's dance team as seen through the lens of a Rebecca Weiss, a junior here at UNO. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at netnebraska.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.
Support for Consider This is provided by Sequent Planning, an SEC-registered investment advisor, helping people make informed retirement income decisions. Additional information is available at sequentomaha.com.